Hey everybody, it's Professor Steins, and I'm kind of making this video today because in the database class, it seems like a lot of people are kind of ready to take the next step and kind of want to start using databases for their own devices, I guess. And so, kind of what I'm going to do today is I'm going to kind of start with a really simple database, and I'm going to kind of create a really simple application out of it. This is kind of what we're going to be aiming for. This is my little My Movies app that I wrote. It took me about 2 hours to do, and so hopefully this video won't quite be that long because I'll be doing it kind of the same but over again. And it's pretty simple. It just kind of organizes movies into categories. Like over here on the left, these are the kind of different categories I got started. And so, kind of when you click on one, you kind of get the category and what movies are attached to it. And you click on one that doesn't have a record yet, then I kind of have a make more records message that shows up. And it's a real simple little database. Just get some records in there and kind of get some code writing. So my hope is that I can kind of recreate this guy from scratch and kind of show you how it's done, at least in this one way. Not how it's done, but one way that it's done. And this can kind of give you an idea how most of the work here is actually in the coding, not necessarily in the database, but the decisions in the database have a pretty extreme effect on coding. And so it's really important that you kind of we kind of get the database figured out before we start coding. So, but anyway, this is going to be a real simple application when we get done with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go first. I'm going to start with kind of defining what my database is. I'm going to start by opening up a blank database in Access, and I'm going to save this first table and just call it movies. And I'm going to kind of create a new folder back here on my desktop for it called Blockbuster. And probably should have done it when I made it, but I'm going to go ahead and do it now, and that's save database. I'm going to make sure that it's in that Blockbuster folder, at least for right now. So now it's in the right spot. It's in this folder, and I got a movies database here. I'm just going to kind of flip to the design view, kind of look at the data dictionary, and go ahead and make some different fields for it. So I'm going to start by changing the movie ID and kind of give it a movie name and a movie rating. And well, I'm kind of going to add a field right above that for movie description. And I'm going to kind of change all these to be long text instead. And then I'm going to give it a movie, well, we'll call them categories. So this is going to be the move cat. This is the movie category. And I'm going to give it a number attribute for right now. So that's kind of got my one database, my one table figured out. So I can kind of come in and start adding movies in. So we got Snakes on a Plane. That was one of the ones that I saw over there. And, some kind of easy description. And it's rated R. And I don't have a movie category yet, but I'm going to say that that's one for right now, because what I need to do is I need to go into create and make another table, and we're going to kind of go ahead and save this guy and call him categories. I'm going to flip to the design view and change that to cat ID, cat name, and cat acro for acronym, and change these guys to long text. And well, I'm gonna go ahead and change that one to long text too. Save that guy and flip back to my datasheet view. So on movies, I put 1 for Snakes on a Plane, which is kind of an action movie. So I'm going to kind of start with action then, and that's ACT for the acronym. And then we're going to say drama, DRA, comedy, CMDY, kids, well, kids. And I'm going to kind of try to keep it a little bit simpler than we did in my example, because I wanted to make sure I get records kind of for all of these guys. So I'll go ahead and throw anime in there too, why not? So that's kind of my 5 different categories. Now I can kind of come back to this table and kind of organize things a little bit the way I want to. Snakes on a Plane, that's an action movie. It's called Expendables. That's another action movie. Description is the 80s are back. It's rated R. That's an action movie. And so we could do a whole bunch of them, but I'm kind of going to switch around. So I'm going to go ahead and throw Memento in there. And who, what, and where, why. It's rated R. And that's actually technically a drama, so that one's going to be a 2. And kind of look at some other dramas. Gangs of New York. I think that was in the drama section. Leo Can't Win Anything. It's rated R. It's a drama. Star Wars. And kind of put some descriptions in here. As you can see, this could get really long. I mean, we could have a database with hundreds or thousands of records, really. And most Star Wars movies are PG, except for Return of the Jedi. These are going to be, or not Return of the Jedi, the Sith one, third one. Let's see, we're going to call them action movies, I guess. Do Planes, which is a Disney movie. It's rated G. That one's going to be a kids movie. 4. Usually when you see people, in the movies, speaking of, I watched this past weekend, Hackers. This is a mid-90s movie about computers, and it is probably not for real, and I think pretty sure it's rated R. And I don't know where it fits in there. It's kind of a comedy, but at the same time, we'll call it a drama, I guess. So I got kind of a good mix of movies using different categories. One last thing I kind of need to do before I finish this guy is to put the relationship in for these two. So I'm going to add these two tables and make sure I drive this to there. Oop. Doesn't like it when tables are open. Did I have an extra record in there? No, I guess it's fine. Okay. So now that everything's closed, I should be able to make that. It's weird. It doesn't like to do things when things are open. You kind of find that when we get to writing the code to figure that out too. So anyway, I'm going to save this database, and I'm kind of done with it for right now. I've tied these two things together. There's a movies table and a categories table. Movie belongs in one category. A category can have many different movies in it. Real simple database, real simple relationship. It's not really that bad, huh? So anyway, I'm going to kind of start writing some code about it, and that's really where most of the work comes in. So I'm going to start by kind of opening up Visual Studio. I need to close this guy down and save it. So this is Visual Studio, and if you haven't used it before, this is kind of how you can get started. And I'm going to start by going to New and Website. And I'm going to create an empty website, and I'm going to just use Visual Basic because that's what I'm best in. So I'm going to come back down, look at my desktop, pick my Blockbuster folder, open it up, click OK. And I guess we'll just click that one, hit OK. Basically all it does is it just gives me a web config file with not much in it, and then that's the database that I created. So one thing I want to do is I just want to rename this guy, call it MyDB. Blockbuster, I'm going to need to, this is a little bit of .NET, but every little application, everything's going to be a little bit different. So in .NET, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to add this app data folder. This is a kind of a reserved folder in .NET that holds things, and it's just kind of going to protect my database a little bit. So I'm just going to kind of move it to there. Now, once I kind of double click my database, which I just did, you can kind of see it opened up a little bit over here on the right, is that now I can kind of look at my table over here and kind of can see my names of my fields and stuff. There's not a whole lot you can do to them. It's kind of going to expect you to modify it and access. We're just kind of connecting to it from a source view over here. And there are a couple things I can do. Is I can kind of write a query for it, and it kind of gives me the query editor. I can kind of add my tables together, just like I could in Access, and kind of build a query out of it. Figure out what names I need, which is what we're going to be doing here in a minute, really. But so anyway, this is a web config file. I'm going to kind of close it down. Now that I got my database in an app data folder, I need to put a page in there. And this page is going to be a kind of just a basic web form named default. And it's kind of going to create two files, this default ASPX and this VB file. If I kind of look in, this is my folder of my code. I can kind of see my app data folder with my database in it, and default file and web config file. One other thing I can add, since I'm right here, I'm looking at it anyway, I'm going to go ahead and just add my style.css file. That way I can kind of be editing it as well. So I'm going to kind of real simple CSS to kind of get it started is just make things big and readable. Line 3. Width of 80%. Margin 0 auto. That's all I'm going to get for right now. You can kind of you can still edit that right in Visual Studio. I mean, there's no reason why you can't just do CSS in Visual Studio. But let's see. I got my style sheet. I'm going to go back to my page here. I'm going to go ahead and put in my movie app for the title of the page. I'm going to add my style sheet. Add my wrapper class. Oop. Inside my wrapper, I'm going to start creating my different elements of my page. Header, nav, main, footer, and I kind of saved everything. I just want to make sure everything's kind of working, so I'm going to go with start without debugging. And what this does is it kind of makes it run in Visual Studio, kind of makes it run on off your local host port. So I'm kind of running this off my local host at this port number, and that's the page I'm calling. It's kind of cool. Visual Studio can do this. Not a lot of not a lot of languages kind of have this built in, quite like Visual Studio does. So anyway, I got a basic web page going. I've got a database going, and so what I need to start doing now is I need to kind of figure out how I can start pulling this data in and use it in my page. So I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit, I suppose, and I'm just going to kind of come to the design view of the page and go to the toolbox here on the left and go to the data tool. I'm looking for SQL data source. I'm just going to kind of pull it into my page because what I want to do is I want to configure this data source, and this kind of makes it a whole lot easier to do it than knowing what to type out by memory. So I'm going to use this Access data, Microsoft Access data file here. Hit continue, and it's going to ask me to look for it. And so I'm going to kind of look on my desktop to my Blockbuster folder, app data, and hit that database. Test connection, make sure it works because there's no admin and password. You can put an admin and username and password on an Access database, but I didn't, so that's kind of the default. It's going to take just a minute. Oop, still thinking about it. There it goes. Hopefully my video is not rendering. Looks like it's freezing up just a little bit. Hopefully my video is okay. So I'm going to check that my DB and hit next. I'm going to kind of call this guy my con for my connection. Makes it easy. And I'm just kind of setting this up, so I'm just going to hit next and get a basic deal going on here. So what it did is it added this SQL data source in the page, which isn't really what I wanted. What I really wanted was I wanted this web config file to get this connection string built into it kind of automatically. I don't remember it off by hand. I don't, what's the provider and the number, and the data directory and the database name was pretty easy, but it just kind of automates that part. So it did the web config part for me, so I don't really want it there, to be honest. Just hit save, but that connection's now in the back, so I should be good. Okay, so what I want to do is in my code behind file, the first thing I need to do is I need to import the tools that's going to allow me to use an Access database, and that's system.data.olddb. So just by this little import statement, this is going to help me connect to my database and use it. I'm going to define a function to begin with called get categories, and what this function is going to do is it's going to basically pull all the categories out of my been writing JavaScript too long. Get categories as string, and it's going to basically get all the categories in my database, pull them all together, and display it out on the page as a website, or in HTML. So I'm going to hold a variable to do that, blank variable for string HTML, and then I kind of want to return string HTML when I get done. So I'm just going to put hey in there for right now to see if it works. Come back to my nav section, make a code block for get categories, and that's going to be my navigation in my page is going to be what gets returned from this function. So if I hit the button here, I get hey back, so that's kind of the start of my nav section. I'm going to kind of get a little more complex. Okay, now I got a string, it's holding my thing, so I kind of need to come through and start connecting to my database and pulling records out. So I'm going to start by declaring a variable called myCon as OEDB connection, and I'm going to throw the configuration manager dot as new old DB connection, configuration manager connection strings myCon dot connection string. So what that big long statement just did is it just kind of pulls the connection string out of my web config file called myCon, which if I look at it, this is it. myCon is the connection string, and it's pointing to that database file, mydb. That's kind of how that connection's going on. That's kind of one thing I need to do. Another thing I need to do is I need to define a SQL string that's going to be executed. So I'm going to select from the categories table the ID and the name. So it's going to be select cat ID and cat name from categories. And I'm going to order by the category's name. Then I need to define a connection, old DB command, and the old DB command is going to take two parameters. If I kind of look at this one right here, this is the one I'm going to use. Is I'm going to throw MySQL, the command, the string of the MySQL string, and the connection, which is my con, at that command. I need to open up my connection, and then whenever I use the open, I always make sure to come back and use the close. That way, you always want to, every time you open a connection, you want to make sure you close it, because if you don't do that, things go bad. So I'm going to define a result as a old DB data reader, and that's going to be equal to my command by execute reader. If that result has rows in it, then while I read it, I want to do some things to it. So I want to kind of create, I'm going to write some in some HTML and say that every time I come through, what I want to do is I want to kind of just write out the category's name. This is just kind of getting it started. And I want to add a break tag afterwards so they kind of get separated. So I save that and come back to here, kind of hit refresh. This is kind of how I get my list, so you can kind of see that they all kind of came out in order. If I kind of looked at the retrieved data, I didn't actually type them in alphabetical order because anime was last with an A, but now it's kind of in order, the order it needs to be in. So that's kind of got me started a little bit. Kind of reading out of the database. I'm using it to write some HTML. It's going to get a little wonky here, is that basically I'm going to say that if it has rows, then I want to create, I'm going to basically do my string a bunch more and say, I kind of want to create that as I'm going to create a list of these guys. So one thing I need to do is I need to come in and add my list items. So I'm defining an opening UL tag and a closing UL tag. And then for each item I find is actually going to be a list item. Instead of a break tag, I'm going to use a closing list item. So now when I save it, what I should get is I should probably get a bulleted list of the same things because I'm kind of writing that HTML out on the server side. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of keep going with it, and I'm going to write an anchor tag around those guys. So now when I refresh it, it looks like it's a click function. It just kind of goes to the pound character, but it's getting there. This is now what I want to do is I kind of want to add a category ID. And I'm going to do this by doing cat ID equals with a question mark here. And so what this is going to do is this is going to kind of send me to the same page with what's called a query string on my URL. And part of the query string is going to be the category ID that was selected on the left-hand menu. So what that means is when I come here, start the page up, and you kind of see as I hover down on the I hover on the links at the bottom left hand of my browser, you can kind of see it says localhost 18.11 for default.aspx cat ID 2. Or if I click on it, you can kind of see it up here probably a little bit easier, is I just clicked action, so I've kind of passed this as a query string to the page, which is really going to help here in a second because I'm going to use this query string as the second lookup into the database, and so I can kind of pull each of the movies that are tied to a certain category when I click on it. So that's kind of all I need to do for this function. But what I need to do is I need to add a second function called getListing, and this one's going to take in, I'm just going to call it cat as object for right now, and it's going to return a string. And I'm kind of do the same before, is I'm going to define string HTML and then return HTML. Come back to my page here. This one's going to be in the main section, so it's going to be as equal to get listing and I'm taking in a parameter there, so I need to pass a parameter to it, and the one I'm going to pass is the query string object for cat ID. And so if I first come to the page and then cat ID is equal to nothing because it doesn't have a query string on the end. But if I click a link and I come to the page with this query string on it, then it's going to get passed to this function. So in my function, what I need to do is I defined it as an object because basically anything can come through as an object. And I'm going to define a if not is nothing, a cat. So if I correct in believing is that if I come to the page with nothing on it, then I kind of get this error, which technically isn't an error. What I wanted to say is select a category from the left, basically. Closing H3 tag. So, I first come to the page with no query string on it. It kind of is telling me that, but if I come to the page with a query string, then I don't get it because it is actually something when it comes through. So it's just a kind of little simple check to make sure that the query string is actually something as it comes in. So when I do that, now I basically need to kind of do the same thing I did up here, is to find another connection and kind of read from it, but this time I'm going to pull all the movies that are using this category. So it's kind of the same process as I'm going to define a connection as a OldDB connection. Use configuration manager connection strings my con dot connection string and then my SQL as string is equal to select star from movies where move cat is equal to at cat ID. My command as new OldDB command, passing my SQL statement with my connection. I need to add a parameter there because I'm using at cat ID. So it's going to be, I'm adding it to the command, add with value, at cat ID is equal to a cat. Then I want to open that connection. And whenever I open, I want to make sure I close. Icon.close. Still want to define a res as OldDB command or OldDB data reader. It's equal to mycom.executeReader. If res has some rows in it, then while I read it, res.read. I'm basically going to be doing the same thing as before. Is I'm going to kind of, for each movie I find, I kind of want to make it part of the string. So I'm going to kind of add it to my string of HTML I'm trying to create here, and I'm going to put an H3 tag, and I want to put a paragraph tag, and I'm going to kind of put a strong statement in there too. I'm just going to kind of go ahead and different ways to kind of write it, and then after I kind of pull the fields I want to, I'm going to display a horizontal rule, kind of shows the difference between each record. I'm going to be pulling the movie name. Mismatching parentheses. And inside here is where I want to be pulling the rating. And put the dash and put the description, and finally kind of strong to be there. Okay, so kind of added a lot there, but hopefully it actually does something cool this time. Is when I kind of get planes, Disney animation. There's my horizontal roll, kind of saying that's the end of my record. If I click on action, I get a couple different ones. I get Snakes on a Plane, Expendables, and Star Wars. And I didn't put any comedy. Didn't put any of the other ones. Here's the dramas, the Mementos, the Gangs of New York, the Hackers, and so it's kind of doing what we need to do, and it's reading from the database and doing some stuff to it. It's pretty neat. The last thing I need to do is kind of come in here and really just dress it up a little bit with some CSS and kind of add some CSS for the header and maybe some CSS for the nav section and for the main section, the footer section, and some reusable styles. I type reusable, right? So one could be a clear both statement. It's going to clear floats for me because maybe if I want the nav section to be kind of make a two-column layout out of this. So float the nav section with the 25% to the left, and then the main section, kind of give it some float left with 70% padding, left 5%. So kind of should get a little bit of a two-column layout going on. There we go. So kind of action, comedy, didn't put any in, memento, kind of getting back to where what's going on. I need to put in a clear statement here between main and footer. So you kind of see that kind of coming along. I can keep going on, make different assumptions about stuff. I can pull out, put a lot more records in. I mean, this is pretty simple. I didn't. It's not too bad. It's an easy way to get started. It kind of gets you building your first application, and you kind of just keep working with some code. Hopefully, this is. I know this is written in VB, and not everybody knows VB, but it's kind of written in a way I think that applies to just about any language. Is that you can kind of look at this and say, well, I can do this equivalent in PHP pretty easily, or Python or something else. So anyway, this is kind of it's not quite all the way there, but it hits the major topics. You can kind of see that once I start making decisions and writing code, the database part was actually pretty easy. I didn't spend a whole lot of time making my movie database. I spent a lot more time just pulling together the code that makes it work. And that's kind of why you want to have the database figured out before you even start coding, because once I've written all this code that works pretty much specifically for this database layout, if I changed it and did a Netflix type table where I had multiple movies in multiple categories, I'd kind of have to come back and change all my code, or not necessarily all my code, but at the very least I'd have to come in here and start changing my select statements and my insert statements or update statements or delete statements to accommodate the new database structure, which can have a lot of implications in how it displays on a web page. So that's why it's figuring out the database first is really important. But this hopefully this example kind of shows you that how you can walk a database idea out into a website and start creating it. If you kind of follow along the video, I hope that you can kind of, if you get this far, you can kind of make it in something really easy. I mean, we're not too far off from what IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes or lots of other movie websites are. Um, you know, if we had a much deeper database that had thousands of movies in it, it worked pretty well. So, and lots of different ways to manage your information. So, I hope this is helpful, and I hope people find it interesting and kind of how you can take the next steps on your own necessarily. In the in-person database class, I was kind of worried that what will happen is someone will be like, he taught me how to make an application in .NET, and then someone comes and asks me later, like, why are you teaching .NET in a database class? Our DB principles class is kind of is basically that, DB principles. It's got a wide range of different IT majors in it, and it's a lot of information assurance guys and developers and future lots of specific lots of different types of jobs that are going to be coming out of what this class essentially is. And not everybody's going to end up being a developer like this, where they can kind of come in and start writing code and make it do some cool stuff and build a web page basically from nothing, a whole idea from nothing. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll probably end up trying to make some more videos like this. I don't quite know how long this video is going. I guess I'll find out when I hit the end button, but I kind of want to do one for the knowledge at work thing that kind of does something similar, and maybe I can put that as a challenge out to somebody that it's not too hard to really put a website together once you kind of know it all. It's just taken time for me to know that OldDB connection is an object that's in the VB framework that deals with access databases, and this is kind of how it's used, but it's not the only way how it's used. It can be used in different ways, and so you can learn more about server development in other classes, I guess. Although this video kind of applies to all the classes I teach. It's got a mix of HTML in it. I could very easily start putting in some JavaScript to do some more things in the page from the client side, as opposed to writing. This is essentially writing stuff out on the server side programming. So anyway, hope people found it interesting. Have a good one. Goodbye.